This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome everybody, I'm Stephanie Schneider and today is Wednesday, May 5th, 2021, Cinco de Mayo, as well as National Elder Law Month, and we are kicking off the month with this first webinar presentation. I'm so glad that you're joining me, and I'm very happy to be working with an amazing group of panelists today. So I'd first like to introduce Debbie Beaumentre. Debbie, I've known you for more years than we might want to tell people, but I'm so happy to know her. She's made my job as an elder law attorney so much easier over the years. And she is not just a true professional as a nurse care manager, she is just an amazing person, compassionate human being. I've learned so much from her over the years, and our working together is really a true testament to what elder law is about, that we work with other professionals in order to take a holistic approach to resolving the client's issues and helping them meet their goals. So welcome, Debbie. We're really happy to have you. I'm also thrilled to be working for the very first time with Bridget. Bridget is one of my colleagues through the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, and she is joining us today all the way from Arizona. So it's a little bit earlier in Arizona, and I very much appreciate Bridget joining us. And as an elder law attorney, she focuses, I believe one of your specialties is special needs planning.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so Bridget, thank you for joining us. And
Thank
then
you.
I'm very happy to be sharing the panel today with my client, Zeta Reyes. And Zeta and I met about three and a half years ago when she came to visit me with her brother, Araldo. And I've been very blessed to walk this path with Zeta. And excuse me, I didn't think I was going to get emotional. I'm very honored that Zeta is joining us today to talk about her experience. And I'm going to speak about my experience with my dad. So Debbie, I thank you for kicking off today's panel discussion.
Stephanie, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And so she gave me some big shoes to fill. So today's discussion, what we're going to do is my husband was a sheriff's deputy with Broward County, and I lost him at the age of 46 years old when I was 46. My husband was a little bit older than I was, but he had not reached retirement age at the time. We had two children. My son had just gone into the military in the Coast Guard and had been deployed. And my daughter had just started college. So everything was fine and everything was going well. We had just gotten back from a cruise to Alaska, and we never thought that we had any problems and the world was going great. He was going for his physical, and I noticed that there was a problem, which I thought was related to the time difference from coming back from a trip. So I asked the doctor to send him for a test. Well, lo and behold, we found that he had a brain tumor. So when you get this diagnosis and you find out that you have this terminal diagnosis, at that time, it comes as a major shock. And being in the profession that I'm in, you really are not ready for a diagnosis like that. I deal with crisis, I deal with family emergencies, but when it hits home hard. So one of the things that we had to do was find a specialist. And how do you do that? How do you find that specialist? And one of the ways that you can do that is you go to your primary care doctor. ask questions of your doctor. Have him guide you in the direction of who you need. Make sure that your insurance covers the doctors that you're being referred to. A lot of the doctors that were referred to us were out of state. That would have meant that we would have had to have lodging, air transportation, and that creates another problem. We ended up choosing a neurosurgeon down in Jackson Memorial Hospital, and in the long run, looking back, it was a good thing that we did, because once they did do the surgery, we found out that there was nothing that could be done. So had we traveled out of state, it would have been really not a lot of hope that we could have taken care of. Always ask your family, your friends, do some research on the doctors that you're going to choose for your family members when you need additional specialists for your caregiver loved ones. How can you be an effective advocate? Here I am in the profession. I do it on a daily basis. And for me to be an effective advocate, I thought I knew that I could do this. And one of the things that we always tell our care managers are find out the issues. Listen to what the patient and the family members are saying. Ask questions and don't assume. Those are so important. And also keep your emotions in check. This is about what's going on in their household and what's going on with you. I was involved in the situation, so I could not be that person. So I had to reach out to somebody outside of the family to do that for me. When you're walking through all of these emotions and everything, and how do you deal with these stressors? How do you work through all the emotional factors that are going on? And one of the most important things are to take care of yourself first, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of your family, nor can you take care of the patient. You have to take some time, go for a walk, listen to some music, journal, whatever you find is helpful for you. These are things that you need to do to help yourself to get in that appropriate headspace, to be able to get yourself prepared for what's coming next, because the next thing is coming. Whether you think that everything is running smooth, the shoe's going to drop next. Don't be afraid to get counseling. I did not do that at first because I had so much going on. I was operating an intensive care unit in my home, and I did not have time to go for counseling at that time. I had to wait until after everything was over to get counseling. But I always recommend to family and friends, get that counseling. Whether it's group counseling or individual counseling, whatever works best for you, that's the most important part. Again, working through your emotional, mental, physical stressors. Take care of yourself. I can't emphasize that enough. If you don't, then you're not going to be good to anybody else. How do you manage work, home, and family? That was a tough one because I was working full-time. My husband was working full-time, 12-hour shifts. He was working overtime because he was working along with Homeland Security down in Port Everglades. So, everything came to a screeching halt. You can either take leave from your job, or you can take FMLA, which is the family leave. Under your FMLA, you can get 12 weeks within a 12-month period for medical or personal family leave. If it's for somebody that's in the military, you can also take personal FMLA time. You can go to the U.S. Department of Labor and Wage and the hourly division, and you can get all the facts for FMLA under that So they will answer all of your questions for what is covered, who pays your insurance, everything is covered in there. I found that I wasn't, I was doing it all, and I ended up reaching out for help. And you must start thinking on that end. I reached out to community and to family, my husband, and also my husband being with the Sheriff's Department, we had a very large resource pool with the Sheriff's Department. And they have a chaplain through the Sheriff's Department. So think of your religious, venue. A lot of people have a religious background. Contact your church, contact your priest or your synagogue and find out, have somebody come from there to help you out. When a client goes into a hospital or an emergency room, what is it that you need to be aware of, and how you arm them to make sure that they have everything that they need, and what's most important? Make sure that they have a list of all their medications. Don't bring their medications with them. They can get lost, and they will get lost. Make sure they have their insurance cards and an identification card with them. Bring important documents, living wills, healthcare surrogates, power of attorneys. If you don't have those made, make sure you get them completed. We did not have those made at the time. And my husband being a sheriff's deputy, you would have thought that I would have thought of those first thing off, and I didn't. As soon as we got the diagnosis, a friend of mine took us to an attorney, and we got those made immediately because my husband was still able to make decisions on what he wanted done. And we had a blended family. My husband was married prior, and he had children from his first marriage. This enabled him to make the decisions that he wanted to make at that time as to who was going to be his healthcare surrogate, who was going to be the power of attorney. So this way there was no conflict in the family with his adult children. So it's very important to make sure that those documents are in place ahead of time. So when you go in the emergency room, make sure you have all your doctor's names. Make sure you have your emergency contacts and next of kin. One of the most important things when going into an emergency room, there's a thing called observation. Observation status is a 72-hour hold. If you are placed under a 72-hour hold and not admitted, you can be denied rehabilitation. So you need to make sure that your loved one, patient, or whoever is under admission and not observation, because they have to be admitted to the hospital for 72 hours in order to be covered under their insurance policy for rehabilitation, for rehab admission. So that's a very important factor. Also, if they go into a rehab, or let's say they go into a hospital and they don't want to go to rehab and they go home and they find that they're not recovering very well, they have that ability to go back. They have the ability to go back to a rehab facility within a 30-day period. So that's very important to remember. So the client would get in touch with their doctor, and the doctor would write an order for the patient to be admitted to a rehabilitation facility. But it has to be within a 30-day period of discharge from a hospital. And an observation status is when you are going into the ER and you are in, they can put you on a floor, but you have to make sure that you have gone from an observation to admission. And those are the questions that you have to ask of the doctor or the case manager in the hospital. So It doesn't mean that they're holding you in the ER. They can put you on the floor, but you're still in the observation status. And they're just deciding whether or not they're going to admit you. So that's a very important thing to remember. One of the things that we do recommend too is when you go to the floor, make sure that all of your documents, your living will, your healthcare surrogate, all of those follow you to the floor. Don't bring your originals, bring a copy to the hospital. Keep your originals at home. They will get lost. We have learned from experience. If you are deciding that you want to go to a long-term care facility, or you're elderly and you want to move, or you want to put a family member into a community, check out the community. There's several things that you want to do with your communities. Look and see if they're appropriate. And when I say that, is that's a place where you can age appropriately. So if I'm independent now, and I'm going to probably down the road need assisted living, and then maybe skilled, does this community that I'm looking at now have all those three areas in their community? Also, payer source. Does the payer source have veterans benefits available? And do they also have Medicaid benefits available? Very important things to remember when you're looking at communities for your loved ones or yourself. So I think that one of the other things that I want to make sure that everybody is aware of is when you have a crisis, how do you prioritize what is important? And we have this all the time with our clients. And the first thing we say is take a deep breath, because everybody is in a fluster. They don't know what's important, what's not important. Take a deep breath. And then what we tell them to do is write down everything that they think is important, and then make 2 columns. What needs to be taken care of now, and what do they think needs to be taken care of later? And then in the column that needs to be taken care of now, let's start putting what's most important at the top and list it 1 through whatever it is. And then you start working on those as a priority list. And once you start getting that priority list done, then move on to your next list. So that's how we deal with priority list and getting through that crisis at the time. And then again, take those deep breaths as long as you need to, because as soon as you finish one crisis, another one's gonna come, and you will get through it. And it's just a part of everyday life we're finding nowadays. Some words of wisdom that I can leave to everybody is have a support system. When I was going through this, I thought I was invincible. I thought I could do it. I thought I could handle it all. I found out real fast I couldn't. I had a very dear friend who was with hospice. She walked into the house, she looked at me and she said, "Oh no, this is done, you're done." And she called in hospice, and hospice came and took over immediately. And it was like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. And when I deal with clients today and they hear the word hospice, they panic. They think that it is the end of the world. It's not. We have had some clients that are on hospice for 6 months to a year, or who have been on hospice and they get better and they discharge them from hospice. So hospice, unfortunately, has had a bad reputation in the name of hospice, but it's not. And to me, it was my lifesaver to have them come into my home and help me. And they became part of my family. One of the things that I had to decide was, whether or not I was going to have my husband go to a hospice unit or stay at home. After the diagnosis, my husband lived 2 weeks. So it was diagnosed and he passed within a 2-week period. My children and I all sat down with my husband and he wanted to stay at home. And we flew my son in from the military and it was decided that he was going to remain at home. So that's what we did. So these are things, and he planned his own funeral. We had the funeral home come to the house, and with the family present, he went through all of that, and we gave him what he wanted. Some other things that, support system for the caregiver is exercise, rest, journal. I found myself journaling and writing. I didn't write in a book. I was writing on my phone in the journal, and I started laughing. I said, boy, if I ever lost this phone and somebody found it, they would think I was crazy, because I was so angry at the time. And you find that getting that anger out and putting it down in writing really helps. So it's so important to journal and get out whatever your feelings are, whether it's sadness, whether it's anger. You're going to go through those stages. It's part of the 5 stages of death and dying, and everybody goes through them in different ways. Always remember to reach out to others, reach out to friends, reach out to family, reach out to clergy. One of the pearls of wisdoms that I can give to you, the most important, make sure you have all of your legal documents in place. I can't emphasize that enough. It saves you a lot of heartache in the end so that you don't have to do it. I have all of my legal documents in place. I made sure that I did them when my husband did them so that I don't have to do them later and my children don't have to worry about that. I also have my funeral plans completed because I made sure that my children would not have to do that. But one of the things that my husband did prior to his death was he wrote a letter to his children. And this was such an important thing because when he passed, we took those letters, and I took those letters, and I gave them to his children. And the children have these letters as a keepsake that they can always look back on and read and hold that remembrance. So these are little things that people can do for family members to hold the love of that person. I think I've covered it.
Thank you, Debbie. That was beautiful. We appreciate you sharing your experience.
Thank you.
Bridget, welcome. Welcome to Florida.
Yes, thank you. Where's the ocean view?
That way.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to echo a lot of what Deborah has shared with you, but maybe from a different perspective, and that being the perspective of an elder law attorney. So just in brief, my story involves both of my parents. So a little over 5 years ago, my father, who was perfectly healthy, or at least we all believed him to be, was traveling alone, and he had a massive stroke at his destination. So we all went in a hurry to the hospital where he had been brought to, and he had been there for about a week. He was not able to speak or communicate in any way or really perform any daily living activities, but he did appear to have some level of cognizance. He did recognize his family. He wanted to communicate. That was really painful to see someone you love appear to understand what's happening and wanting to communicate and can't. Well, on his about a day before his discharge, he spiked a fever. They said, we're going to run some more scans. The day of discharge, they come in and said, we're really sorry, he has stage 4 lung cancer. We had no idea. So we arranged for him to go back home from that destination. He was in rehab and he passed away within a couple of months. So that was crisis mode from start to finish, as Deborah probably knows from her experience with her husband and other clients, but as many of you may have experienced as well. So pedal to the metal, no time really to breathe. You're just focused on that. And really, you don't have so much of an opportunity to reach out to others, lean on others, take advantage of those resources I found in that crisis mode. And I did learn a few things that I'll share with you in a moment. And then the other story is about my mother, and that continues to this day. She does have vascular dementia. She's legally blind and hard of hearing. And at the time my father suffered the stroke, he had really taken care of her, and it was not apparent to me and my brother what her deficits were, to what extent she had deficits, until after he was gone. And so we have been experiencing that very slow and painful decline, just as painful as the crisis, right? Over these 5 years of making the decision against her wishes to move her from her home and the home she shared with my father to assisted living. And then also recently making a decision to put her on hospice, which I did struggle with. Even though I'm an elder law attorney, I struggled with it because to me it meant the end. But it is not the end, and the support is amazing. And this happened during this pandemic. And what it really did for me is when I could not go in and check on or see my mom, the hospice nurse could every week and gave me a report. So we had that additional support, those eyes and ears, and I knew my mom was being kept comfortable. And I shared with Stephanie, since we first met virtually during another program, that my mother then suffered a fall in the last couple weeks and broke her hip. And she was on hospice. And so the big decision then was, do we have her go into the hospital to be assessed, to be whether she's a candidate for surgery or not? Because the initial admission to hospice followed a traumatic hospitalization that I did not want to put her through again. So I struggled with that decision, but I learned how very easy it is to get someone off of hospice if need be. And that's what we did, because we really wanted to address the pain and the healing more than anything. And then how easy it is to get back on after you've addressed that need. So that was a learning experience, and I'm really grateful that it was as seamless as it was. So she is back in her assisted living. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, that kind of trauma takes a toll. So she has deteriorated quite a bit since that happened. So we're just, I do feel like we are now really looking closer to the end than ever before, but again, thankful for hospice. So what have I learned in these experiences? Well, many things, as we all do, but as an elder law attorney, just like Deborah in her profession in doing what she does, you think you're prepared and you're just not when it comes to your own family. And you do know and have a lot of information and experience, but there are certainly things until you have dealt with it firsthand that you are not aware of. That, for that experience, I'm grateful I'm able to bring that learning experience back into my practice and with my clients. So some of those things relate to what Deborah was speaking about, and that is the various legal documents that, you know, I encourage anyone and everyone, you know, as soon as you turn 18, because I have 2 college-age daughters, and I preach to my friends who have children that age, they're 18, get those documents in place. Don't wait till you're elderly and think that's when you need them, or there's a crisis and you think that's when you need them. You never know. And so you don't want to put your family in a position of not being able to access information or be able to make decisions for a loved one of any age in their adulthood. But as to those documents, what I learned was very interesting. So I had always been a proponent of what we call springing healthcare directives, springing financial power of attorneys. What does that mean? It means it's not effective immediately on signing. It means it's triggered by the individual's incapacity or inability to make or communicate informed decisions. So it's like a sleeper document until you need it. Well, now I am of the opposite mind, and I say make the document effective immediately. Why? Because my experience with my father was that although my mother was present at all times, I think they recognized her inability to really process and make decisions. And obviously he couldn't communicate decisions, so they looked to me. You know, I was the default there at the bedside to guide and make decisions, to give me information. When I went to those medical professionals and asked them to sign a statement saying my father could not manage his financial affairs, so I could trigger the financial power of attorney and start dealing with that side of things, they refused to do so. And I think one reason being these were not my father's longstanding physicians. They didn't know him from before. They didn't know when he left. I mean, they might have had a good idea. What would his recovery be? If they triggered this, you know, when he walked out the door, would he then be capable? So that put us between a rock and a hard place trying to get things done on the financial side. So what now I communicate to my clients is when you're signing these documents, you are picking an agent, an alternate agent that you presumably trust and have the utmost confidence in. And if that's the case, then why wouldn't you make the document effective immediately so there are no obstacles to them acting when the time comes? So the real discussion revolves around who are you selecting as your agent? Who is that person going to be? And kind of walking the client through that. And also, it doesn't have to be the person you think you should designate. I mean, I have clients who say, well, my wife is fine with the finances, but she'd be a basket case on the medical side, and I want them to pull the plug, so to speak, and I know she won't do it. Well, then she's not the one to name as your agent under the medical directive. So there is a lot of thought that should go into that in discussion, but in the end, if you pick the person you trust and have confidence in, then give them all powers and abilities immediately. So that was definitely a lesson learned. Another lesson that I didn't personally learn, but a colleague who also went through her own challenges with healthcare matters in her family suggest that rather than having a combination document of your medical power of attorney with your living will, because that's how we used to do that, they're just one seamless document, make them separate documents, because what the living will, which is the document that delineates what life-sustaining treatment you may or may not want under various circumstances, conveys, unfortunately, to medical professionals that you don't want to be kept alive, and they translate that oftentimes into a DNR. And that document isn't really for the medical professionals, it's really for the agents to guide them in their decision making. And so keeping them separate will allow for you to demonstrate, yes, you have authority to make decisions, but retain flexibility and discretion in making decisions. And maybe when you're at a stage with that loved one where it makes sense to give that living will, then you present that separate document. But I thought that was helpful advice as well in terms of whether it be a combination document or it be kept separate. A couple other things that we do as elder law attorneys and that I learned a lot about in dealing with my own family's issues is the question of when and whether a guardianship is appropriate. So my mother is Latina and she's very feisty, and she had her opinions and she was resistant to many things along the way. And I was very concerned at some point, despite having the documents in place that gave us authority to act, that because she was not amenable or cooperative and would demonstrate that with medical professionals, that I might be forced to have to become her legal guardian. And when it came to moving her from her home, we were very close to thinking we would have to do that. But I paused and I took a step back, because in reality, all that would have meant in our circumstance is that I had another legal document in my hand. It would not make the job of moving my mother against her wishes any easier. It would not have facilitated that any more easily than the medical directive I had in place. In fact, I didn't really need a directive. I just needed to be creative and to have a plan on how I was going to accomplish this. So for me, I thought that, that would cause a lot more angst and grief than what it would bring to the table. And even before that ultimate decision, I had hired a Deborah. Thank goodness for Deborahs in the world. Again, I'm an elder law attorney, and I'm the daughter of a Latina, and the daughters, we are the ones that need to take care of the family and do all things. But I did realize that I had real limitations, not only in my knowledge and experience, but in my capacity, my emotions. It was really interfering with my personal relationship with my mother. And so one of the best things I ever did is get this private nurse case manager involved. She has been part of our family. Well, I say that, my mother wouldn't say that probably, for over 5 years. And even though my mother is on hospice and has a lot of support there, our private nurse case manager, she knows my mom more than anybody else. So she still is involved, not as much, but I'm comforted by someone who knows my mother and her history, going in periodically and saying, this seems a little off, or your mother seems this way or not this way. And so that's very helpful, is having someone with that history. But again, to just have that independent third party with that knowledge and experience, coordinating every aspect of care. And, she was willing to do the hard things that I just couldn't bring myself to do. And one of them being actually physically moving my mother from her home to assisted living. So thankfully we avoided guardianship altogether. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. We do guardianship work for many people and it's very appropriate, but you really have to think through and ask questions of the lawyer that maybe you're working with, drilling down to what is it you really are looking to accomplish or needing in that moment, or foresee needing, and whether this is what is going to facilitate that. Because maybe it's not. And it is an arduous process. It can be costly, and it's not pleasant if you have a loved one who doesn't understand that they need that help, and doesn't want to participate in that process. So that was another lesson learned on the front line, so to speak. And then last but not least, Stephanie, as I do Medicaid planning for clients, we help people plan to try to preserve to what extent they can their resources while facilitating their eligibility for Medicaid to help pay for the cost of care in at home or in an out-of-home living arrangement. So my mother has certainly been a candidate medically for Medicaid services for some time now. And I could have done this planning a long time ago. I decided I just really didn't want to be all that aggressive with that planning. I just felt comfortable allowing her for the status quo and the slow drain of her resources, just knowing she is settled somewhere, we're happy with where she is. And if and when the time comes, because it is if, I don't know if we will ever be faced with having to apply for Medicaid, depending on the resources and when she might leave us for that better place. So unfortunately, I am seeing a timeline now. It's coming closer to me. And as I said to Stephanie, I have to get rid of the dreaded timeshare. So now I'm like, oh, I can't avoid that any longer. But I do think you don't have to feel as if you have to pursue that planning, because it is, can be complicated. It can be disruptive to some extent to continuity of care if there has to be a change in a living arrangement, and then you're having to do that sooner rather than later. So don't feel as if that's something you have to pursue before it really becomes necessary. So those are really my highlights of lessons learned. And I think I did want to share a book recommendation, and I really think this goes to also Deborah's experience with her husband and family, is Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that book, but it's excellent. It really highlights that the ultimate goal is not a good death, but a good life all the way to the very end, and how to have those hard conversations and also ensure that we never sacrifice what the people we really care about want for themselves at that time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bridget. You're unique, and I so much value you being on this panel today, because being an attorney, as you said, you have more knowledge than most people going through an experience, yet when it's in our backyard, it's still very hard. So we have
Yes.
to reach out to others, know that there are resources, that we are not alone on an island. So I appreciate your
Amen.
honesty.
Thank you.
So Zeta, you can go ahead and unmute your microphone. Here, let me help you. I'm hoping Zeta is not having internet issues, but let's, okay. Zeta, can you hear us? Can you, yeah, there you go. Zeta, are you able to hear us? I think Zeta is having some internet issues. Hello, Zeta. I'm just trying to send her a message. See if that helps. Zeta? Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to change the order of things, and we'll have Zeta come back in. Hopefully she'll have a better internet connection. And so while we wait for Zeta, I will share my journey with everybody. I was just finishing law school here in Florida. My parents were living up in New Jersey with most of my family. And my mother called one day to say she had noticed that my dad, when walking, would sometimes shuffle, or it would look like he would trip over his own feet. And they went to his primary care physician, and the physician recommended that he see a neurologist in New York City. So my parents traveled into New York, and the neurologist did some testing and told my parents that he was pretty certain that my dad had early stage Parkinson's disease, which affects the neurotransmitter called dopamine that the brain produces, which helps send messages from the brain to the nerves to the muscles. And I came home for a long visit to understand what this disease was all about. What could we do? What did we need to implement? And the good thing was that it was an early stage. My dad was still independent. He could speak. He could tell us what he wanted, what was important. And so the first thing that I did was to find an elder law attorney where they lived in New Jersey. And thank goodness I had this wonderful resource across the country of attorneys that belong to the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. So it was a great resource and a very easy way for me to find good elder law attorneys to help my parents. So because I did not keep up my license in New Jersey, I wanted somebody who knew the laws to make sure, as Bridget said, they had proper legal documents. And although I could still explain certain legal issues to them, I wanted the New Jersey elder law attorney to draft them. So that's where we started our journey. My mom was 8 years younger than my dad, and she was still working. My dad was able to work probably for a few more years after that. And at that point, we applied to Social Security for disability benefits for him. Luckily, it took a couple of months, not too long, and today, thank goodness, the Social Security Administration has a listing, what they call their Red Book, of certain diseases and illnesses where they process the application much quicker than they have in the past. They also have what they call compassionate allowances. So there are other types of diseases and illnesses where if that's what the diagnosis is, it's more of an emergency processing of the Social Security disability application. So I want to leave everybody with that tip just to have in your toolbox if you know of somebody who's in that situation, that it will not take them a long time to get their benefits. Zeta, I see you've joined us again. Hopefully you've got a good internet connection now. From there, we were very fortunate to have a very good
I'm
neurologist.
sorry.
That's okay. I'm just sharing with everybody my experience, and then
Yes, I was.
we're gonna save the best for
I
last,
couldn't
Zeta.
hear you.
Okay. So the next thing we did is we explored a very rare surgery that had just started back then, called deep brain stimulation, and my father was determined to be a good candidate for it. He was in good health, and he did have that surgery, and I think it definitely contributed to him not just living longer, but really delaying the progression of the Parkinson's disease. But I had to come back to Florida, and I was running my own practice. I had opened my own firm at that point in time. So I knew, like Bridget, I needed somebody else to help. I had a sister living in San Francisco. I had a sister living in Washington, D.C. But we really needed somebody with eyes and ears on the ground, especially to help my mom because she still had to work full time and then come home and take care of my dad. So we found a wonderful geriatric care manager in New Jersey, and she was just a lifesaver, connecting them with all kinds of resources. At one point, my dad went to a senior center in our town, and that was great because it gave him something to do during the day when my mom was not home. He was interacting, he was socializing, he was being stimulated, and she was just a great resource. And at times when I couldn't, or I just didn't have the time to advocate or to research something, she was there for us. So I do want to echo what Bridget said. Now we call them aging life care managers. We don't call them geriatric care managers anymore. They're a great resource to definitely take advantage of. We also did Medicaid planning, and I did handle the Medicaid application. One thing everybody should know is if your loved one is in one state and then moves to be closer to you, Medicaid will not automatically transfer. So you do have to go through the application process again when your relative or your friend comes to the new state. So you do want to be prepared to have all the documentation you're going to need, such as the proof of the assets, proof of income, proof of US citizenship or resident alien status. So that's important. At a certain point in the progression of the Parkinson's, it became very difficult for my mom to care for my dad at home. They lived in a two-story house. All the bedrooms were built on the second level of the house. We had an aide for a period of time, but a decision for safety reasons had to be made for my dad to go into a skilled nursing facility. And one of the things I learned that I have been able to share with clients in my law practice is to always take the time to thank the people that work there, the staff, the aides, the nurses, or when he had to go into the hospital, to make a point to always show appreciation. You know, in the nursing home, I would make sure that on holidays we had food sent in for the staff. That's really important. So having that good communication, especially when you're long distance, is helpful because when I would call, they knew who I was, they remembered me, they appreciated that we showed our appreciation. And, you know, even for the little things that I asked for, you know, they got done. So I think that was really important. At a certain point, we all decided that it would be best for my dad to be down here. One of my sisters moved from Maryland to Florida, and my mom had made the decision to sell the house and also relocate here. And so it was just a natural progression to make the arrangements to bring my dad to Florida, and I could not have done it without our care manager. So much had to be coordinated, getting an aide to travel with him, making special arrangements with the airlines, making sure that he was going to be accepted to the skilled nursing facility here, who had to first review his New Jersey medical records. Without her, I don't think it would have gotten done as well as it did. So it was much easier when he was here local, but I will tell you that the last few months that he was with us, I felt like I got up in the morning, put rollerblades on, figuratively speaking, and it was a matter of somebody pointing me in the first direction I was going that day, whether I was going to the office, I was going to the hospital, or I was going to the nursing home. And during the day, I was making my rounds. Sometimes it felt like I didn't know what day of the week it was. And if it was not for having a great staff here at the office and family to tell me this is where you're going now, this is who you're seeing next, I'm not sure how I did it. I too, like Deborah and Bridget, decided that hospice was really a wonderful thing, not something to be afraid of, that was going to benefit my dad as well as my mom, my sisters, and myself, you know, as we walked that path. And it was really an amazing, impressive experience. And I do suggest to people that don't wait till the very last minute. There's more benefit, especially to the person with the illness, that they can receive by receiving that care earlier than later. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you're asking for the recommendation of the primary care physician and that person says no, or that person delays, get another opinion. And I think that is what makes us strong and effective advocates, is not always accepting the answer no at the time it's given and not assuming that it's the right answer for you. Ask questions. Don't take no for an answer. Get a second opinion. I think what was my saving grace is my yoga practice, which is now going on about 30, 35 years. I would sometimes bring my mat wherever I was, and as soon as I got on my mat, it helped me get centered. So, as Debbie said, find what works for you. You may have very little time. That's kind of a given, but it is so important that you carve out. Could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Take that deep breath. I think those were Debbie's words. Get on a mat. Go take a walk around the block. But you have to do something to feed your own soul, to refresh your mental health and your outlook, to help you get through it. So Zeta, I'm going to unmute your microphone now, and hopefully it's going to work. Zeta, go ahead and unmute yourself for some reason. There you go. So I'm very happy to have Zeta with us today. She's one of my favorite clients. And why is she one of my favorite clients? She is a great listener. She thinks outside the box. She reaches out and says what resources are available that we can take advantage of. And so I'm so honored to have her here and have her share her experience with her brother, Araldo. Zeta, I know you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
I did. Okay.
Zeta, you're having an internet connection. There's an issue. So let's try to help herself. Zeta, go ahead and mute your microphone. And you have the phone number. You can call in, and we should be able to hear you much better.
Thank you, Stephanie.
So while we're waiting for Zeta to call in, there was a message in the chat box. It's a question for Deborah. The question is the observation status you talked about in hospitals limited to just when a person goes into the emergency room?
Okay, so the observation status, when you go into a hospital, a lot of times they will admit you to the floor and you can still be under an observation status on the floor. The reason for that is they are trying to determine on whether or not they're going to admit you as a full direct admit. So don't always assume that because you are a patient on the floor that you have been admitted. And that's why you always want to check, ask the doctor, and also ask the case manager or social worker on the floor if you are a direct admit.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, Zeta, it looks like you've dialed in. But let me see if I can unmute your phone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Good job.
Okay.
It looks like you dialed in.
Oops. I actually can't see myself now.
Let me see if I can unmute your phone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Good job.
Okay. Okay. I still seem to be behind. Oops. I actually can't see myself now.
Let me see if I can unmute your phone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Good job.
Okay. Okay, I'm ready.
So Zeta, I think you're going to have to disconnect from the GoToMeeting link because it's creating feedback. Just stay on the phone.
Okay. Let me see. Okay.
I'll take care of it.
Okay, I'm on the phone.
Yes. Now we can hear you much better. Zeta? Zeta, you look like you're frozen. Zeta, can you unmute your microphone on your cell phone?
Stephanie, I think she hung up the phone.
We're going to give her a second to try to dial back in on just the phone line. Okay, here she is. Hello, Zeta.
I'm here,
Wonderful. We can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
but you can't see me. Oh, there I am. Can you see me and hear me? Hello?
Zeta, don't worry about being able to see you. It's more important that we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm going to start.
Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon to all. So sorry for the glitches. I wanted to thank Stephanie for your kind invitation. I am honored to be part of such a distinguished panel. And I would like to share my experience as a legal guardian and caregiver to my brother Haroldo. I was scheduled to retire in October of 2017 after working over 30 years as an administrator for Miami-Dade County elections. And I had many plans of everything I was going to do, including a lot of traveling. But God had other plans for me. In May of 2017, just 5 months before my retirement was due, I received a phone call from my brother in Boston, Haroldo. He was calling me to inform me that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and was advised by his doctors to get his affairs in order, and he wanted to help me move to Florida to be closer to the family. Of course, I was totally shocked to hear this, since my brother was only 52 years old at the time. He was a Cornell graduate, successful career in electronic engineering. He had a passion for performing as a professional actor, dancer, singer. He was a musician. It was totally devastating news. We cried together on the phone, and I promised him I would hold his hand and we would do this together. At that time, his financial planner and his friend in Boston referred us to Stephanie Schneider. We're certified attorney specialized in elder care. However, after we planned to meet with her only to get a power of attorney and some health directives. But after spending several hours with her in consultation, she recommended it was best under his circumstances and best to protect him, both in his financial and health, to have a voluntary guardianship. He at the time was able, of course, to understand that, and he agreed, and he asked me to be his guardian. So that's how I started being his guardian. Of course, I did not know what I was getting into. I didn't know anybody else that was a guardian. The guardianship process, including having to take online training courses. Core requirements were many, including preparing inventory budgets, financial annual reports, spreadsheets, all kinds of documentation, and maintaining detailed records was very important, and it was, of course, required. If it had not been for Miss Snyder, I would have never been able to do this, with her patience and how she guided me every step of the way. I then started research online, health insurance coverage, and looking for the specialty doctors and all of that in order to be able to serve him in the medical field. As our oldest condition continued to advance, it was moving pretty fast. He required more assistance in living, and he had moved here. He bought a house, and before the 2 years were up, we had to move him to an assisted living facility. And then, of course, COVID hit, and all the assisted living facilities went on lockdown. And Aroldo just could not comprehend at the time why this was happening, how he was not allowed to leave his apartment anymore or even go to the dining room to eat, how he was not allowed to go out with his friends or even see me. So this was a big ordeal for him and for me, being living in another county. At that time, then my emotional state became like a roller coaster ride. He started wandering off the premises in the middle of the night, going out through the fire escape. So fear just set in. I was terrified that he would hurt himself or disappear on me or hurt someone. He started to be found in the hallways, sobbing, wishing he wanted to die. His personality started to change totally, from being a very calm, easygoing, friendly guy, always with a smile, always laughing. And he became this depressed and very angry individual. He started getting physical, pushing staff members, trashing his apartment at one point, and just acting aggressively even towards his friend that was helping him on a daily basis. As this crisis continued, I had to have a 24-hour aid service to keep him from harming himself and others. And while I was desperately trying to find a memory care facility, I've always been very independent, and I thought I could handle every situation. But then I realized now, of course, after the fact, that had I hired a care manager at the proper time, I would have saved myself a lot of heartache. especially trying to find these locations. I found that most memory care facilities, including also the assisted living facilities, they would not accept anyone under 62 years old. So that was a big, it would deplete the amount of places I could go visit and check on. To me, it was a desperate situation of being able to find him in memory care facility now. And it was a big ordeal. I couldn't sleep with worry. I was in a desperate situation. And I also regret not reaching out to a support group. I was at the beginning, I always felt, well, Haroldo is young. Nobody has experienced this. Most people are experienced with elderly care patients. And I can't relate. But then came to realize that no, actually, Alzheimer hits everybody the same way. These stages just follow along in different lengths of time, but they all follow the same pattern. And I could have been helped a lot emotionally and also in resources if I had done that. Um, I I made sure I went to all his doctor's appointments. They always told me once he gets physical and his personality changes, that's going to be it. It's going to be downhill from there. So I was very concerned about his situation now. Before, as soon as he moved to the memory care facility, I went ahead and prepared. I talked to his primary care physician and asked them for a referral to a hospital that was close by. So in case that he had to be moved as an emergency, that I would already have that document, which turned out to be very helpful because a couple of weeks later, he had to be moved to an emergency room. There, it was another issue now. He's in emergency. I arrived and they will not let me in because of the COVID. And I kept telling them, he can't speak for himself. You need me. I have to talk to the doctors. They still would not let me in. They told me you have to go to your car and from your car call this number. And I called the emergency nurse. So I was very frantic and that was very hard to do. I did, unfortunately, his condition continued to decline very quickly in the hospital. And I was contacted in the middle of the night by a nurse telling me that we have to get your authorization to intubate Haroldo. He's having very big seizures and also he's having trouble breathing. And I said, no, you can't do that. Because thankfully, while Haroldo was still well, he actually had all his directives, his living will and everything done, and it specified what he wanted in this type of situation. So that made me make the decision immediately. I said, no, you can't do that. Here's the documentation. And they, of course, followed the directives on that form, on that document. And I did not have to make the hard decision. Once they realized that he was in not gonna live any much longer, I was only given 2 hours to visit him. I'm sorry, and I was not allowed to return after those 2 hours. He passed away, fortunately peacefully, but a couple of days later, on October 9th, 2020, with only a nurse present by his side. I did not understand why at the beginning the guardianship required that I do funeral arrangements and all of this. I thought he's going to live maybe 10 years or more. I don't have to worry about this now. But since I was required to do it, I complied. And believe me, it was such a relief. All I had to do was make a phone call the next morning and everything was taken care of. So I only had to sign some papers later and that was it. I was very blessed, I feel, with the support of the friends and the family, their encouragement and prayers. I had Stephanie constantly by my side. I could contact her anytime. And her expertise, guidance, and especially her patience with me was amazing. I also believe in God's love, his mercies, and knowing that he was in control of the whole situation, that gave me strength and peace.
And what I thought at the beginning, oh my God, what a burden I have. I was going to retire. I'm 70 years old. Somebody should be taking care of me instead of me taking care of someone else. Now it actually, I was so thankful to God that He actually gave me this opportunity to assist him, and he's in his Alzheimer's journey. And I still question myself on what more I could have done, but I felt I did the best I could with the resources and the knowledge I had, and hope he's in heaven in peace. Pearls of wisdom, the most important decision we made was reaching out to an attorney specialized, and that was able to guide us through all the court proceedings and everything. And also, I would recommend, of course, hiring a care manager, because I went through the experience of not having one. And one of the things that it's typical of me, I have binders on everything, and I did prepare an emergency binder, what I called an emergency binder for all those items. And there I kept all his information, his IDs, all his legal documentation, the guardianship documents, all his will, everything that related, his medical information, his whole life was in that binder. So anytime I needed to go to the doctors, whatever, I will always carry that binder. And it was very easy to just carry it around instead of having to dig through papers or carrying around a whole bunch of different items. So that I suggest you do. It's really, it helped me a lot. And finally, do reach out to others and do take care of yourself. I didn't reach out much. I felt, I had to bear the burden myself, and I was responsible. So, but that's not the right way. You do need help many times, and I was still thankful for the support I did get voluntarily from all my friends and family, and of course the attorney. And thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you, Zeta. That was beautiful. We appreciate you sharing.
Thank you.
So at this point, I'd like to open it up if anybody would like to ask a question or wants to share something that perhaps they've gone through that would be helpful for somebody else to know. Okay, so I see in the chat box, Olga has a question. How do you do Medicaid planning? Bridget and I would need half a day on a webinar to answer that question.
I know, I was like, that's a loaded question.
So I think, and I'd like to hear Bridget's response as well. The simplest answer is you first want to start by finding an informed, educated, qualified attorney. Okay, here in Florida, we have a lot of attorneys. I think Arizona too are some of the most heavily populated states when it comes to licensed attorneys. But law, like medicine, is specialized. So if you were having a heart issue and you didn't feel well, you wouldn't call a podiatrist, right? So you have to go through a similar process when you have a legal issue like Medicaid planning. You want to start with either your local bar association or your state bar to find somebody who has specialized. So you don't want to call the bankruptcy attorney or the personal injury attorney. You want to look for somebody that is an elder law attorney, and then call the office and ask questions. That'll help you be certain that you're going with the right person who has the knowledge, the specialized knowledge that you need. Bridget?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, a good resource is the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, NAELA or NAELA. So you can go online and they have a search engine for consumers to find an attorney throughout the country in your state, in your locale. And then, as Stephanie said, don't be afraid to ask questions. You are hiring this attorney potentially, so you should be able to ask questions to be able to identify their level of knowledge and experience with Medicaid planning, because and all elder law attorneys don't do Medicaid planning. Elder law is an umbrella that encompasses a number of practices. And so be sure to specifically ask, do you do Medicaid planning?
I'm sorry to ask, but what exactly is Medicaid planning? Just, I mean,
Oh,
I have
sure. Well, I mean, and there is our Medicaid in our state is the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. I don't know what you call it, Stephanie, in Florida, but it's a federal and state cooperative program that provides medical assistance, and if you rise to the level of needing skilled nursing care, long-term care assistance to cover the cost of your care to some extent if you're living at home, at least in Arizona. And then for the most part, in out-of-home living arrangements such as assisted living, a care home, or skilled nursing facility, but you have to meet medical and financial eligibility requirements to qualify.
Thank you.
Stephanie, I just wanted to add, I did put it in the chat box, but as Zeta was talking, and Zeta, thank you so much for sharing, and I am so sorry for your recent loss of your brother. He was very fortunate to have you walk with him in this journey. But when she talked about not being permitted to be with her brother in the ER or hospital, obviously during this pandemic, that's been a challenge for many. And just be mindful. And I know, you know, people feel we're coming out of the pandemic, but it just depends what's happening locally, if there's a surge or not, what hospital restrictions are in place. There is a compassionate care exception, whether it be the hospital or skilled nursing facility, that allows you as the decision maker or loved one to see your loved one in that setting, and it doesn't have to be an end of life situation. So if you have that, if you're armed with that information, you can advocate for that exception to apply so that you can see your loved one in that environment.
Thank you, Bridget. That's a really important point. And as you said, we're not sure when we're actually going to be clear and through this challenging time. So that's an important advocacy tool for everybody to be aware of. Thank you. And I see Ginny added something to the chat box. So do open your chat box because you'll get the opportunity to see some great information that's being shared in it. And I want to thank everybody who presented. I want to thank everybody who attended today. As I mentioned when we started, it was recorded, and we'll get that recording up on the website. So please, if you know of somebody that can benefit from anything you've heard today, please share it with them. And take care of yourselves. Continue to stay healthy, mentally, physically, emotionally. And we hope that you'll join us again soon. And have a great Cinco de Mayo.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Stay well. Enjoy.